I grew up in an atheist home with Buddhist, Taoist, Confucianist roots. My parents were not religious. My father came to Australia from Malaysia in 1962 and his parents were from China. My mother was born in Sydney. She was a Scottish Aussie, her mother being from the Cameron clan, and her illegitimate father had an Irish Protestant and Jewish background. He had been sent off to Catholic boarding school by his single mother. My parents met at university. My father was studying to be a doctor. My mother was studying to be a lawyer. They married in 1963 and I was born in 1965. Our first home was with my grandparents in Roseville. My grandmother looked after me, so my mother could keep going to uni. My parents started working, we moved to Forestville and I started school. In 1970 in Sydney, children would all go to scripture classes at school. It was before the days of respecting different religions. It was before the days of the option to go to non-scripture. So I went to the default class with the Anglicans. In scripture class, we learnt different stories in the Bible. The Bible was a collection of different books. There were many stories, and they did not always make sense. They often contradicted each other. I was a good reader and a good speller, and I liked to write. But the more I went to scripture classes, the more I thought scripture was a waste of time. It was not until I went to high school that I learnt that the baby Jesus of Christmas and the crucified and risen Jesus of Easter were the same person. No one had ever thought to mention it. I was shocked. The stories were connected, and the connection changed my reading of both stories. Reading C.S. Lewis helped. There was a trilogy of fantasy books, Out of a Silent Planet, Voyage to Venus or Perilandra, and That Hideous Strength. Lewis had written them to help us understand the great themes in the Bible. One of C.S. Lewis's books is very helpful in understanding how the different parts of faith are connected. It's called Mere Christianity. I was 14 years old when I became a Christian. I started going to church, but it was confusing. As a new Christian, I was hungry to learn about God and the Jesus stories, but the church often seemed to focus on other things. I got so frustrated with the lack of talking about God in church that I went to theological college to learn about God. And eventually, after 17 years of part-time study, I had completed all the courses available and was still hungry to learn more. By then, I was the Director of Lay Education in this Synod of New South Wales and the Australian Capital Territory, and I had a small team of ministers who looked after the education of more than 450 congregations. Across the country, we Christian educators and mission leaders agreed people struggled with biblical literacy and biblical conversancy. We struggled to read the Bible and talk about the Bible. At college, I remember going to a lecture given by the theology lecturer Clive Pearson. He talked about different understandings of Jesus. And I was shocked. I was so shocked I burst into tears. At college, they knew there were many different understandings of Jesus. There were many different experiences of salvation. There were many different ways to understand the birth of Jesus, and there were many different ways to understand the cross. I was outraged that they knew this, but we hadn't been hearing the differences in our congregations. As a teenager, I'd heard about salvation in these terms. We were separated from God by the chasm of sin. We needed the cross to bridge the gap, and only the death of Jesus could save us. To me, this did not sound like good news, it sounded like bad news. When people said it's good news that Jesus did this for us, I would think about the bad news that we followed a God that required ransom and payment. What I learnt in college that I had not heard in the congregation was that even in the scriptures, there were many different ways of understanding the need for the cross and the way salvation worked. Many times I heard arguments, this is the right story. No, this is the correct story. No, my understanding of Jesus is right and yours is wrong. No, my God would not be like yours. In college, I was learning that the biblical writers thought different things were important. Peter and Paul and James and John placed emphasis on different stories. Then I learnt more about Jewish culture. For Jews, conversation is not meant to result in a single interpretation or a single meaning. Talking about the sacred stories is meant to give us an appreciation of understandings beyond our own, of things beyond ourselves, of the wisdom learnt in the spiritual lives of others, people with different experiences. We need the stories of a diverse community to better understand the God who is creator of all. Our different perspectives are important, and when we hear only one interpretation, we are diminished. At Eastwood, we have the opportunity to hear and learn from different stories. My story is not the same as yours. I will learn more about God and faith if I listen to you. We will learn more of God if we share our thinking and our wondering or our questions. I want to hear the stories of life and faith that make up the good news from this congregation. What do you think about God? Have you met God? What difference does God make in your life? Which parts of the Bible speak to you? In approaching the scriptures, we see different things when we read a whole book, not just a small group of verses. We can make connections between the announcement story in Luke, the Annunciation, and the life, the ministry of Jesus, and the cross and resurrection. When we read the Bible in community, different voices bring us a bigger picture. A lone voice will never be able to say enough about God. Every voice, every person has something to offer that will help us get a different perspective and go deeper. Do we have a story of Jesus to tell? What are the things that are most important to us in the Jesus story, and why are they important to us? How can we share our stories of Jesus?